In life, we all live with compromises, and that is true for the motoring world as well. In fact, what we have here is a compromise. It is the Mercedes-AMG A35. This is not the 100% full-blown AMG model, and neither is it the standard cushy A-class limousine. It is somewhere in between. So what does this in-betweenness really feel like? That is what we are trying to answer. This car, the A35 AMG in this loud, shouty shade of yellow, is definitely something that catches your eye on the road. But is this AMG enough? Because generally, the typical hardcore AMGs are represented by the 63 or the 45 nomenclature. All your lesser models like the 35 over here in this case, they are not true blue AMGs. They are not something that engineers at the AMG factory fiddle around with the engine, they modify it in a big way, and then they sign it off. That's not the case. So you can think of this A35 sedan or saloon, if you're watching in Europe, as something that rivals the S range of vehicles by Audi and the M performance models by BMW. So typically something like the S4, S5 or the BMW 340i. And the 340i from the price perspective is also a very direct rival to the A35 sedan. And that is exactly where things get a little difficult for this car. Now, this one also has a four-wheel drive setup. This splits a torque in 50-50 ratio between the front and the rear axles. And the maximum that it will send out to the rear axle is 50% of the power or the torque. But for the most part, this behaves as a front-wheel drive car. And that is exactly where the defining differences between the 340i and this one are evident, because you are largely driving this at about 8/10 and it exhibits that typical understeery character, which the BMW does not. It is more oversteery in nature, and yeah, you can really have a lot of fun with the 340i. This is also immensely good fun. The A35 has a 2-liter 4-pot engine, does about 301 horsepower and 400 Newton meter, and that is a very crucial figure. The 400 Newton meter of torque that you get in such a small car, that is what really defines the character. The way it drives is determined by that, and you get that instant surge the moment you get on the throttle, and the pull is very linear, but at the same time, the moment you bury your foot into the carpet, it is very addictive as well. The way it gains pace. You just have to go through the transmission, bang it a couple of gears down, and then floor it, and you'll be able to have an instant smile on your face. Yes, it is debatable that the smile is because of the purity of experience when it comes to AMG, because as I said, if you compare it to the A45, that thing is mental. That thing is literally going to eat this up for breakfast. But this has more pliancy to it. This is something which is more forgivable, but at the same time, AMGs are always associated with that level of hardcore involvement, and that is what the A35 does not really offer. But make no mistake, it does really drive very well, and to ensure that it gives you a sense of driving involvement which is more than what your typical A-class limousine is going to be like, is the fact that Mercedes-AMG have given it some specific tuning and some specific add-ons. Like there is a shearing plate at the front, which adds a little bit more rigidity and lets you have a little bit of play at the front end. It's more communicative. And there are a couple of diagonal braces at the front as well to reduce torsion and increase stiffness at the front end. So in terms of the way this thing dives around corners, is extremely intuitive. Yes, it is quite low for our roads, and managing some sharp speed breakers will be a little bit of a bother. It actually can definitely scrape its belly as well on some slightly tall ones, but otherwise the compromise between the chassis stiffness and the level of compression that the suspension offers is actually not too bad. The engine crankcase is made of high-strength die-cast aluminium, and the twin-scroll turbocharger also has a very unique construction. The housing of the twin-scroll turbocharger is divided into two ducts, and that overall with the whole exhaust system results in lesser back pressure from the exhaust. And speaking of the exhaust itself, it houses a flap which basically is monitored and or rather governed by what drive mode you're in. So if you're in comfort, it's going to be nice and sedate, it's going to be very balanced acoustics. But the moment you get into Sport or Sport Plus, it's going to open up and give you all the experience that you want from the tailpipe, and it's going to be a little bit more growly in nature. And yeah, I think we have said this time and over again that this 4-cylinder, 2-liter engine is actually not too bad. And in the AMG trim, it's also been the most powerful 4-pot in the world. This engine sends its power to the wheels through a 7-speed gearbox, and this one is a dual clutch setup, and inherently it feels very front wheel driven. But the moment the car senses that there is a little bit of a torque compensation that needs to be done, then it will send that amount to the rear wheel as well to just balance things out between the two axles. So it's really only in very tricky situations that you will ever find yourself gulping down a big lump of scare. And otherwise, it's something that is going to be pretty alright. Now the A35 also features torque vectoring. It's going to apply the brakes on the inner rear wheel whenever it's stepping out and getting a little jittery around corners. So that is definitely something that's going to keep you in check whenever you're throwing the car around. And this is probably not something that you would want to take for long distance cruising. I'm not saying that you can't do it, but as I said, the suspension is okay to live with, but it's not so pliant that you would want to go on roads that you don't know about. One very fun thing in the A35 or any of the performance cars by Mercedes-Benz that you will get is this one option called AMG in the menu in the screen. It gives you the way the suspension is behaving, and then it gives you a G meter, so you can have your lateral Gs measured along with the input of throttle and then braking performance as well based on a vertical chart. And then there is another option which is named engine that gives you a graphic of how much horsepower and how much torque are you consuming. And then is the consumption, which basically gives you a chart of how much of a fuel have you consumed or burnt by your throttle applications. In terms of the cabin, that's where it kind of suffers because it's a small car. If you're sitting in the front, absolutely no problem at all. The seats are pretty good, they hold you in place as well. And because this is an AMG, you have that whole AMG treatment. The cabin is all dark, while the regular A-class limousine, you get a dual tone setup. And just generally as well, it feels pretty good. The steering wheel, I've said this before as well for the regular A-class limousine, that for the size of this car, the steering wheel feels slightly big. In this one, it's a flat bottom. You have perforated leather around your grips, and just generally, it's okay. Yeah, but the size is a bit too big. Space at the back, not really the strength of this car, and it is expected as well. So if you want something that is very good at accommodating 4 people in comfort with ample amount of space, this probably is not the right choice, and you would want to look at the option, which is the 340 by BMW. Now, this being an AMG and things being a lot firmer than the regular A-class limousine, the interior also suffers with some rattles and some squeaks, which is understandable to a certain extent, but also unforgivable because this is a Mercedes-Benz and you expect the best of quality in the cabin also. Yes, generally the cabin is pretty alright, it's made of decent materials, but when you apply stiffer suspension, absolutely crazy dynamics, and more involvement to a platform which otherwise is fairly soft and very nice and cushy, you will have some sort of things going wrong on the inside, and that's exactly what happens over here in the A35 as well. In terms of features and equipment, you get almost everything. It's fairly well loaded, so you have the whole net of safety features. You have all the connectivity options as well, Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, everything of that sort. And you get this nice big slab of glass with 2 screens, which are very, very slick and also very sharp. And the best view is when you get into the Sport Plus mode. In comfort, the suspension has been okay, not too bad. But the moment you get into the Sport or the Sport Plus mode through this toggle switch over here, then things become extremely nice, and that's when you start to understand that the AMG in this A limousine is basically all about the fettling around that the engineers have done. This bright yellow, and generally also the design of the car is such that the A catches your eye very properly and it stands out on the road. So the design, very subjective. I think the 340 also looks pretty smart, but the color options are not that great, and it's a very subdued way of telling people that you're driving a performance sedan. This one, this shouts it, and it shouts it in style as well. But specific to the A35, what does this car feel like? Well, this is the A-class limousine that's been thrown into the foundry. It has been given a little bit of a fire treatment to come out with more performance and a little bit more excitement. And this is a good option in the 50 to 60 lakh bracket. But then it also faces some very stiff and extremely good competition in the form of the 340i. That is right now the default performance sedan in this category. So yes, it's a bit of a thinking game that you have to do, whether you are more of a brand aficionado when it comes to the AMG title, or you would want to go for the BMW one, which is not an M, it is an M performance model. So yeah, you'll be divided over there. This at least has the AMG badge, and that itself is something that will put a smile on many, many faces.